Hey guys, today we're going to talk about fence fighting. If you've ever been outside on a beautiful day, enjoying your yard with your dog, only to have them turn into a completely different animal the minute the neighbor's dog comes out, then you know how stressful and frustrating fence fighting can be. Here's the good news about fence fighting. It's actually a problem you can really solve with some good management tools. First, let's talk about why dogs fence fight to begin with. It's a territorial and/or frustrated greeting behavior. The dog gets very overstimulated about this other dog that's just out of reach. They can see and smell the dog, but they can't quite access it, and that can be very, very hard for a dog. Not to mention it's on their territory boundary lines, which can also exacerbate a lot of emotion for our dogs. The behavior is also self-rewarding because when the other dog goes inside, your dog gets this feeling of like, oh, I accomplished the goal. I got a response. The other dog left. So this behavior of running back and forth along the fence line, it's working. That also means the longer this behavior is allowed to happen without us intervening, the more likely it is to continue and the more ingrained it becomes. So it is something you want to get on top of. We're going to start off discussing some management strategies. A lot of people think that when you're resorting to management, that somehow that's not real training or that's the easy way out, but that's not the case at all. Management are the tools that we use to stop our dog from repeating an unwanted behavior. And when our dog no longer has that chance to repeat the behavior, it often just kind of goes away on its own. Another great example is counter surfing. People think they need to catch the dog in the act of jumping up on the counter and punish them and do all these training techniques, which I suppose you can do, but a much easier solution is to just gate off the kitchen. Yes, it's kind of annoying, but it's going to stop that counter surfing behavior because your dog will no longer be able to rehearse the cycle of going into the kitchen, finding food on the counter, and jumping up and getting the food, which rewards the dog for that counter surfing behavior and further reinforces it. So really, management is working smarter, not harder. Management works really well for fence fighting. So we're going to be focusing primarily on management strategies, but we're going to be covering some training options you can add on to if you're up for it. Okay, our first management strategy is going to be just talking to your neighbor. This can feel a little awkward, but it's honestly the easiest, quickest way to make some progress eliminating the fence fighting issue. It's really important to keep in mind how you're framing this discussion with your neighbor. You're not telling them, oh, your dog's a problem, your dog is making it so I can't enjoy my yard. You're presenting it as a problem you are solving together. The neighbor isn't the issue, it's the dynamic that's the issue. So just an example of a kind of loose script you might use, you could say, hey neighbor, I've noticed our dogs have been going pretty crazy at each other along the fence when they're both outside at the same time. I'm working on it from my end, but I was wondering, do you have a regular schedule of when you let your dog out? Or times when your dog definitely won't be outside? I'm thinking if we coordinate even a little, we could cut down on a lot of the chaos. So the important thing when you're presenting this dialogue to your neighbor is that it is not accusatory. You're framing it as a team effort, a problem you're solving together as neighbors. You're also just asking for something pretty easy for them to give you, which is just a general schedule of what their timetable with their dog looks like. And it opens the door for some collaboration without putting your neighbor on the defensive. Now, your neighbor might not want to entertain any of this and may not be helpful at all, but you might as well try because it's a really easy first step. And it also shows your neighbor that you're aware there's an issue and that you're working on it. And of course, trying to understand each other's schedule and work around each other is not always going to work, and you can absolutely acknowledge that. But even reducing some of those overlaps when the dogs are both outside a little bit is going to be really, really helpful. The next thing you're going to want to do is just be a little more aware of your surroundings. Try to get familiar with your neighbor's dog's general patterns. Even if you don't have a conversation, maybe you yourself can notice patterns of when the dog is out and when they're not out. I'd also start doing a quick visual or auditory check before you let your dog out. This is what I do. Actually, my usual process is first to take a quick peek outside and see if my neighbor's truck is in the driveway. If it's gone and I know the neighbor's gone, I also know that means their dog isn't going to be out, so I'm free to leave the door open for Remy. If the neighbor's car is there, then I'm much more careful. I'll pop out, check, try to make a noise, or try to look and see if I can see that neighbor's dog walking back and forth along the fence line. And then if the dog's not out, I'll let Remy out. Or if the dog is out, I'll take Remy out on a leash. This will become second nature really quickly, and it only takes 5 seconds. Yes, I know it's a little bit annoying, but that's kind of just the price of having neighbors. You are going to have some inconveniences, and this might be one of them for now. Okay, let's talk about the double fence option. This is honestly probably the most effective management option on our list, although it does require a fair amount of effort and it might be a little pricey, depending on what kind of fence you're looking to build. So the idea here is that you're going to install a second fence 1 to 2 feet away from your original fence. And the way that works is it's going to create a significant buffer barrier between the 2 dogs. And it means the dogs physically won't be able to get nose to nose. That less direct contact is going to really help lower the dog's arousal. And really, a lot of people, once they do this second fence option, it erases the problem completely. The only problem is if you have a fairly expensive fence and you want to match the aesthetics of your first fence, you might be looking at something that's fairly pricey for building a second fence. But your second fence doesn't have to be pretty. You could just do T-posts and welded wire, or even chain link as your second fence, which is a lot more cost effective. Now, if you've made some good inroads with a neighbor, you could potentially pitch this as something you could split the cost for. They might say heck no, but you can still ask. Let's say you don't want to do a second fence. Another option is to add some thick shrubbery along your fence line boundary. Dense shrubs or hedging along your fence line can help create a visual barrier. Since the dogs can't see each other as easily, the arousal is going to be lowered. Also, having that shrubbery along the fence line prevents your dog from being able to run back and forth directly along the fence line, which is going to continue to amp them up more. Now, this one might work better for some dogs than others. Some dogs might still barrel through those shrubs and get as close to the fence as possible, but other dogs will be a lot more hesitant to push through some thick shrubbery and hedging. Remy is a dog who does not like to push himself through tight spaces. Like, he won't open doors that are even a foot open. He'll bark at me to open it further for him. It's very cute. It also comes in very handy because I've been able to get by with some pretty ratchety fences, and he won't dig through them. He won't jump over them. He's very respectful of physical boundaries. Another option is to add a visual barrier or fence cover. So installing some kind of privacy screen, slat cover, or fabric fence cover along your fence to add a visual barrier and prevent your dogs from seeing easily through the slat spaces between the fence. Now, this doesn't solve the problem entirely. Your dogs still smell each other, hear each other, and get really close to each other. But it does still reduce some of the visual triggers, which can lower arousal and lower the intensity of the behavior. Even if you can't stop it entirely, it might reduce your dog's arousal enough that you can work more on recall and some other training options to get your dog inside. Or it might even solve the problem completely. It really depends on the individual dog. And this is a super inexpensive, easy setup. I decided to experiment myself with the mesh barrier option, and Color Tree was kind enough to send me a sample to try out. They have a ton of different sizes and several color options, so I was able to get a section that perfectly covered the side of my fence that bordered my neighbor with the dog. It's also nice that adding the mesh panel to the fence doesn't require any kind of special tools. It's super simple. You just use nails to secure the mesh to the fence through the eyelet holes. Or if you have a chain link fence, you can just use zip ties, like the ones Color Tree provided with their mesh panel. Right away, without any training, I saw Remy's reactivity and arousal levels drop significantly. With the barrier up, he just wasn't as hyper fixated on the fence all the time. And when I started to incorporate some training cues, he was much more responsive. Previously, the only way I could get Remy inside was to basically grab him and push him inside. But with the mesh barrier, I was able to get him to refocus on me and follow an inside cue, which is absolutely huge. It was pretty easy to set up too. I think it took me 30 minutes, maybe not even that long. So if you want a really easy, cost-effective option to start with, I would definitely recommend trying a mesh barrier like this one. Okay, next we're going to talk about some training options, but really quickly, I just want to talk a little more about management in general. People a lot of times say, well, shouldn't I be training my dog to respect me and listen to me and follow these commands? And that every problem needs to be resolved through some kind of test of wills with their dog. It doesn't really acknowledge that dogs are not computers. We can't just teach them a new skill, upload it, and then be like, perfect, it's all set now. Training requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of repetition, clarity, and consistency. Don't get me wrong, training with your dog is awesome. It can be super fun, it can be really great for bonding, and really powerful for developing certain skills. But it's not always the best solution for every problem. And when management offers an easy solution, it's going to be the better option almost every time. You know, there's a saying people use that management always fails, and to some degree that's true. If you're relying on gates to prevent an aggressive, dangerous dog from getting outside, there is always going to be some time where a friend visits or a neighbor or someone doesn't quite close that gate the right way. That's true, and it's worth acknowledging. But I would say training can also fail too, all the time. If you're not practicing a cue and maintaining it regularly, your recall can fail. Even when you do maintain a skill, your dog can have an off day. We also have to think about what kind of behaviors we're trying to prevent. Stuff like prey drive or fence fighting are very deeply ingrained instinctual urges. They're also self-rewarding, where the dog is getting something, some benefit or internal reward for the behavior. Remy is easily aroused, and you can just tell, even when that dog isn't out there, the first thing he does when he goes outside now is he beelines it for the fence because he loves it. He loves the high of that feeling, that adrenaline, that excitement. So it's important to be aware that it's going to be challenging, and if we utilize management, that will also make our training easier because we're going to be setting up our dog for a more successful scenario in which their sightlines are reduced, we can help keep their arousal lower, and that will allow our training to be more effective. And here's the thing management skeptics seem to forget. Management is training. Like I said before, every time you prevent the fence fighting from happening, even if that just means making sure the two dogs aren't outside at the same time, you're interrupting the rehearsal of that behavior. Less repetition means less reinforcement. And as a result, the behavior is going to weaken over time. Okay, now let's cover some training options that are going to help with the fence fighting. One of them is working on an inside cue. The idea here is you're going to teach your dog a specific cue that means they need to immediately leave what they're doing out in the yard and go inside. And you're going to reward heavily with a huge jackpot right inside the door for them coming inside. Now, you could use a regular recall in this situation, but I think it's a good idea to separate them because here's the thing. A regular recall is a general purpose cue used in all kinds of different situations and different environments. Using it out at the park, out on walks, all over the place. It also requires the dog to locate you and come find you. and then get their reward. This inside cue, we want to be hyper specific. It means one thing: go inside and your reward is going to be on the ground already there for you. I like this idea because the reward is pre-positioned. Your dog doesn't have to come find you. There's no questions about where you are, where they have to go, how long it's going to be until they get the reward. Because we're working against such instinctual behavior of fence fighting, we want this cue to be super, super clear for our dogs. I want my dog to have practiced coming inside and getting a huge jackpot reward right in front of the back door, so often to the point where he can practically see it in his mind's eye. He has this kind of visual image, because when we're working against a strong natural instinct, we need a strong, clear alternative behavior. The clearer we can make this cue, the clearer we'll be able to cut through our dog's arousal when they're out there fence fighting. And it really reduces the effort cost of your dog coming inside. So here's how we're gonna build it. You're gonna start practicing this when the neighbor's dog is not outside, so that you're in a super low distraction environment. Then you're gonna toss a high value treat just inside the door, say your cue, and let your dog find it. Then you're gonna build repetition until the cue is reliable, and your dog is eagerly running inside when you say the cue. Only after you've practiced this a ton are you gonna wanna start doing it when the neighbor dog is out. And even then, you might wanna be using a long line to help get your dog a little distance from the fence so that they can remain a little clear-headed and make smart choices before giving your dog total free rein to be right up against the fence and then expect that cue to work. The other training technique we're gonna work on is having our dogs disengage from the fence and reorient towards you. To build it, you're again gonna wanna start when the neighbor's dog is not out, and you're gonna be outside in your yard with your dog on a long line. You're gonna start handing out high value rewards to your dog as they disengage from the fence and come towards you. Then you're gonna add the cue word to that behavior. Once that's reliable, you can practice when the other dog is outside. And when you start to practice this outside when the neighbor dog is also out, I might actually recommend starting on just a normal leash so that you really are very close to your dog. The distance is small and they can a lot more easily refocus on you when you're standing right there with them and are connected to them. Eventually you'll be able to graduate to the long line as your dog develops that skill and works on that cue. Eventually the goal will be to have your dog be able to be out in the yard with you, and you'll be able to call your dog away from the fence and reorient them towards you, even when the neighbor dog is out. And this is a much more advanced skill. It's gonna take a lot more work and a lot more practice. So don't rush and think of this as a really long-term goal. You'll keep practicing this on a long line for a long time, probably weeks. Voluntarily disengaging from that fence line is going to be super hard for your dog, especially if your dog has been practicing fence fighting for a while. That also means you're always going to be outside with your dog. They're never going to be alone, unattended in the yard when the neighbor dog is out. These are really two different training tools for two different situations. The inside cue is your exit strategy. This is just when you want to get your dog inside ASAP because you noticed the neighbor's dog is out. It's simple, easier to maintain, and you're going to be able to use it right away. The reorienting cue is your long-term behavior modification work, which will hopefully give your dog the skills to eventually be in the yard calmly with the neighbor dog present. So start with the inside cue. Once you have that done, you can start working on the reorient cue. Hopefully that's helped you with some ideas on how to work on fence fighting. I know it's really annoying and stressful, and I have to admit, it was really nice when neither of my neighbors had a dog and I could just let Remy out whenever I wanted. I could leave the door open anytime, but that's not the reality. You know, we live in community with our neighbors. They are not the enemy. And unless you're living on a huge property with tons of acres where you can just let your dog roam around and do whatever, you are going to have some restraints on how you're able to use your space based on your neighbors. That's just life. You know, nothing to get too upset about. It gives us a good challenge to work on with our dogs. And with this problem, luckily, there's a ton of great management options that can help you, even if you don't feel like doing the training work. And really, I would recommend doing both management and training. Hopefully, this will get you back to enjoying your yard the way you'd like to. All right, guys, if you ever had any fence fighting issues, let us know in the comments. I would love to hear about your experience. What did you try? What worked? What didn't work? Tell us all about it. Thanks, and until next time, have a great day.